It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Welcome to Truth Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news. So welcome to another episode of Truth Sentinel, one of the only travelling podcasts. We've been to Ukraine, Jerusalem, Malaysia, tropical islands off the African coast, Egypt, Turkey, all kinds of countries, and currently in Thailand. We've just had Songkran, a festival which is one of the largest water fights in the world. So I got blasted in the face the other day while I was going along my motorbike. It's great fun. So let me tell you about today's episode. It's going to be about the moon landings, and I'm going to be speaking to Seth Davis. Future guests could be former MI5 operative David Shayler, who may be coming on to talk about the Skripal poisonings and the Syrian chemical attacks, or so-called chemical attacks. I just wanted to tell you about some episodes that you might want to check out. Got all kinds of episodes, especially for our new subscribers. You might want to go and check out some past episodes. We've got the Crow 777 interview about the moon and the possibility that it's just a projection. I've got an interview with ISIS ex-wife Tanya Joya, and Jeren on the flat earth, and also Mark Sargent talked about the flat earth. We've got episodes on MH370 and whether it was taken by the Russians. The Russians are getting blamed for everything, so why not that as well? We've got episodes about Diana, the death of Diana, and some of the mysteries surrounding that. Lots of episodes on secret societies, cults, Scientology, data manipulation, and we've got also episodes on motivation and success. I interviewed David Essel about that. We've got lots of episodes relating to space, theories of life, vampires, all kinds of things related to religion, space, conspiracy theories, the psychology of fear, Vietnam. We even did an episode about cryptids and space dogs. We've done more serious episodes on logical fallacies, an interview with the first human head transplant donor. Not sure if that's still happening. We'll have to check on that at some point. We had an interview with Sean Stone, son of Oliver Stone. Gareth Ike came on during one of our episodes. David Shayler, who we might be speaking to soon, again was on episode 22. Go back and check that out. We had a lot of episodes regarding Ukraine and the problems that went on there, and I was there at the time. So anyway, I just wanted to let you know about that. Also, our website's currently down. The honest truth is that I can't afford to keep it going at the moment, so any donations greatly appreciated. You can find us on YouTube and click on the About section. Donate there. It'd be we'd really appreciate it. I'd like to get the website back up again, but honestly can't afford it at the moment. One thing you can help us with, if you can't help us economically, is sharing the videos. I appreciate that we don't have as many views for some of our episodes as some other channels. Some people do pay to advertise their podcast, but finances are limited, unfortunately. So what you can do is help share our episodes. If you enjoy it in any way, please just click share at the end and pass it along to some other people. If you've got a lot of subscribers, I'd really appreciate that. Especially, you're quite welcome to re-upload the videos, but just let me know if you do that, because it's just nice to keep in contact. You can always email me at scottsentinel9@gmail.com. Anyway, enough of me waffling. Let me go and talk to Seth Davis and ask him the question: did we really land on the moon? Welcome back, Seth.
How are you doing, Scott?
I'm doing pretty well, thank you. Yeah, I'm here with my Thai whiskey. I've only got a little bit, but I thought it would help sort of keep this a nice relaxed chat between us two. We're going to talk about the moon landings today, a topic which maybe 20 years ago I thought I was always open to the idea that it was faked, but I kind of really didn't think it was. But more recently I've been kind of thinking some of the points that people are making against the idea that we've landed on the moon, and the time that's gone past since we landed on the moon in 1969. I've just become increasingly dubious really as to whether it actually happened. So we're going to talk about that today. And in the interest of transparency, I would say that I'm going to act as devil's advocate on some of the issues, but as I just said, I am becoming more doubtful. I still keep an open mind. There is a sort of a small percentage of an idea that I have that we could have landed on the moon, but it is just becoming less and less likely for me. At the very least, I would say that it's not crazy to think that we didn't go to the moon, which I think it used to be sort of, for a lot of people a decade ago. And we're going to talk about some of those reasons today. I wanted to start by briefly talking about why I think it's important about whether we land on the moon or not, because some people would say, well, who cares, it doesn't really matter, but I think it does, because if governments are capable of lying on that kind of a scale, and remember, moon landings are taught in schools, then...
Well, it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry, too.
Yeah, it's
so,
a trillion-dollar industry, and they can easily lie about news events and convince people they need to go to war in Syria, which is, kind of what's happening in the world at the moment. And
which is also a multi-trillion-dollar industry. War.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And so I wanted to start by asking, why would the idea that they've lied to us about going to the moon, why would it matter to you?
Personally, the thing that really kind of sparked my interest in the subject actually happened quite a while ago. This is before what I would even consider my own political awakening. This is before I got into independent news media, anything like that. This is actually an article that spread like wildfire all over the internet in 2009. This right now, the particular one that I'm reading from is the London Telegraph. This is moon rock given to Holland by Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin is fake. A moon rock given to the Dutch Prime Minister by Apollo 11 astronauts in 1969 has turned out to be a fake. Curators at Amsterdam's Rijksmuseum, wow, I butchered that, where the rock has attracted tens of thousands of visitors each year, discovered that the, quote, lunar rock, valued at 308,000 pounds, wow, was in fact petrified wood. Glad that was insured, I'm sure. Zandra van Geyder, who oversaw the investigation, said the museum would continue to keep the stone as a curiosity. Quote, "It's a good story, and with some questions that are still unanswered," she said. "We can laugh about it." Laugh about it. Lovely.
Yeah. See, I think this is actually quite a strong case against going to the moon, because people have in their minds an image of NASA being a kind of really clever organization who organize things really well, incredible attention to detail. I don't think, if you give a moon rock to a country as a gift, and I actually read about the moon rocks that were given today, and they were all taken from a much larger rock which was broken into pieces. So that suggests that this moon rock that was found to be petrified wood is probably part of the same moon rock that was given to all the embassies. So that's kind of important, and I think it can't be dismissed and laughed at, because that's kind of
indeed.
serious.
Don't you remember the woman that was swatted over this? I mean, it was supposedly somebody at NASA had given her a moon rock there from one of the moon landings, and she had a SWAT team called out on her. I believe it was like at a Denny's or an IHOP. I mean, that was all over the news from 2000, I think, 10 or 11.
No, I hadn't heard about that. I would say that would be interesting as well, because if they are handing out fake moon rocks, then that's the kind of thing they might want to send a SWAT team to make sure that didn't, get out, and people didn't find out too much about that. Well,
ironically enough, she'd been trying to get in touch with NASA because of that, and NASA then swatted her. The fact that they would call a SWAT team on an old woman over it's very endemic of the sort of thought process going on here, of the rule by secrecy type of a thing. And the fact that they would give that out to people just kind of shows the sort of people we're talking about. But at the same time, never forget that Buzz Aldrin was rather famous for, and still I'm sure is, for giving out change to people that as whatever compensation for a meal, compensation for whatever there, or charging people money for it even, of pocket change that he says he took to the moon. That's just that type of a practice would make perfect sense for somebody in this sort of a position, and was actually the thing that piqued my interest first before anything else of looking into the moon landings, any of that. The fact that this is 100% just proven, because people actually insured this thing for, 308,000 pounds.
Yeah,
I'm sure that's, if I were to do the translation on that for English American money, I'm sure we're talking, what, like $400,000, $500,000?
If it was anything else, you could actually call this a criminal case, because you've been given something on faith that's been said to be something, and it's been shown to be fake. It's a criminal act, and I think it's your first point about the fake moon rocks, which is fact, is a good one. And as I said, these moon rocks were broken up, so it came from a main rock, so it suggests that all the moon rocks given to embassies are all fake. That's serious, and I think it's a strong evidence to say that we didn't land on the moon. But what else have you got for me, Seth?
Well, that was just kind of to get us into this. One of the things that, honestly, to back you up, if we can get a little bit further back before we start in this in earnest, just to kind of wrap up with why this should matter, is we are in a day and age when quote-unquote scientists are individuals like Bill Nye the Science Guy. So the average person isn't necessarily scientifically literate when they consider somebody like this as an authority on science, somebody that says that there are more than two genders and all this type of stuff. It's just things that are blatantly not facts. And I'm not worried about people's emotions. I'm not worried about hurting people's feelings or anything. I'm interested in actual fact. And somebody that's obviously not.
Wait a minute, Seth. There's 66 genders now, isn't there?
Oh, I know that's what they'd like us all to believe there and go along with, Scott. But come on. And I'm not trying to be mean to anybody, but at the same time, fact matters more to me than people's feelings. And I'm sorry that that's honest, but I'm not sorry at the same time, because people need to value facts more than they do feelings. But unfortunately, I've noticed that with just about every single topic I could cover out there, even from the days of me doing independent news media on my own with Two Real News and everything. As any single subject you can cover, there will be people that say that, oh, no way, you're just some sort of tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorist. So I'll always at least give a little bit of credence to everything to be able to listen to it for a while before truly making a decision, because I mean, I know some very basic facts that are literal, undeniable facts that people still believe are up for debate in the modern day. So just take it with a grain of salt. But starting... Okay.
Sorry, I read today that psychological testing has revealed that you are more likely to believe in conspiracy theories if you feel anxious, under stress, or feel you have no control over your life. Do you suffer from any of these things, Seth?
Yes, Scott, every last one. And I'm sure that everyone that believes in any sort of quote-unquote conspiracy theory ever is probably mentally ill. I mean, really, Scott, nothing that the news media ever says is fake news or a conspiracy theory. It's all conspiracy fact. I mean, as we all know, there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, right? I mean, the Gulf of Tonkin incident wasn't staged, was it? I mean, the United States military leadership had no idea of the Japanese imminent attack on Pearl Harbor before Pearl Harbor happened. I mean, no way. I mean, those are conspiracy theories. But Trump has connections to Russia. That's a conspiracy fact. Nobody actually has to provide any evidence of that. The newsmen said so. So, of course, it must be.
I was talking about that with a friend today, actually, that, the Russia collusion thing, that's not talked about in the media as being a conspiracy. Yeah, that's just an investigation. But if it was something they didn't like, then it's a conspiracy. So it just depends on what they want to label it as.
Exactly, what the word theory gets tacked onto. But kind of getting back to the moon landing itself, the missions that we're talking about, or moon landings rather, are actually Apollos 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17 that are all claimed to have gone to the moon. And the reason this matters is because just some basic facts here so we can get numbers right, or at least get what the numbers they're giving us today are. The distance from Earth to the moon is now, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people will give me all sorts of different distances, but now it's supposedly 238,900 miles. Okay, so we're talking about a moon, 238,900 miles away. In order to get there, these astronauts are having to travel through a thermosphere that the temperature can range from 500 degrees Celsius, that's 932 Fahrenheit, or 2,000 to 2,000 degrees Celsius, or 3,632 degrees Fahrenheit. So pretty piping hot there. And they got to get through that to get into space to even get to the moon. And then once they're there, the temperature on the surface of the moon during the daytime is supposed to be at about 100 degrees Celsius. And the lunar surface on the dark side of the moon is supposed to be, I shit you not, 173 degrees Celsius negative.
But
Yeah,
surely they
so-
had special suits that could cope with that, right?
Oh, in a vacuum of space, and the suits that they had were tight, 3 layers of tightly woven cloth, Scott. I don't think you understand how tightly woven this cloth was. Continuing though, just the facts, just the numbers that they're giving us, just the facts, ma'am.
I just wanted to quickly mention, you mentioned 238,900 miles, right? The significance is that since then, since the moon landings and the subsequent missions, nobody's gone much higher than sort of 2 or 3 or 400 miles, right?
Yes, low Earth orbit. However, they say they've sent satellites and other unmanned craft further into deep space. The reason for this, and we'll actually get to it later, is the Van Allen radiation belts. However, if you were to keep up with mainstream media as far as the pseudo-science, pseudo-intellectual science channel type stuff of the big personalities out there, they would lead you to believe that the Van Allen radiation belt is nothing more than some minor tickling and minor uncomfortableness that these astronauts would have to deal with. And not actual deadly radiation. But continuing, though, the moon itself orbits the Earth as the Earth spins at around 1,000 miles an hour, orbiting the sun at, what was it, I believe 16,000 miles an hour, something like that they have it. And then the moon itself is supposed to be orbiting the Earth at a speed of 2,288 miles an hour, which is 3,683 kilometers per hour. We are talking about a craft that is leaving a planet, a spheroid that is supposed to be moving at an astronomical speed, literally, in the first place. And then is supposed to be landing on another astronomical body, astrological body, moving at another astronomical speed at the same time over a distance of 238,000 miles.
Yeah, and the significance of this is that a lot of people think that they just basically took off and then just went straight up and then sort of landed on the moon. But it's not quite as simple as that. You have to leave the Earth, get into the Earth's orbit, then move again and get into the moon's orbit, and then leave the moon's orbit and land on the moon. It's a very complicated process, but they did have a lot of good technology in those days, didn't they?
That's what they would say. However, at the same time, they're saying that the average cell phone has about as much, if not more, technology within it than everything that was used in the Apollo missions to go to the moon. So take it with a grain of salt, you know what I mean? That's just anybody that thinks their phone would be able to get them to space regardless of the amount of steel built around it is, whew. Yeah, I'm not
going
even...
to play devil's advocate here and just say that, yeah, I would say if you look at it from that point of view, that's a strong case. But what if you got loads and loads of those small computers? I guess you could give each computer a task, a small task, and that one might create an effective bank of computers, which they did seem to have.
Okay,
at NASA.
Fair enough. And they do seem to have that. However, we would have to have the information from that. And unfortunately, all of the telemetry data and tapes with the telemetry data is gone and has reportedly just been lost somewhere in the shuffle at NASA, which I find rather interesting. So there's none of the burn exit data, none of the burn entry data, none of the landing data, none of that type of stuff that would actually, matter to people that are into the whole geometry aspect of everything. You don't get any of that.
I think that's a strong case against land on the moon because, all of that data going missing, including the original television footage that NASA took, that's gone as well. I find that kind of very suspicious. I think that's a strong case that they're trying.
It's something that even when I was completely on the bandwagon with everybody else, that I thought was very suspicious and strange in the first place as well. Because why wouldn't you have all of this information, considering this is the sort of stuff that physics majors are going to just absolutely have wet dreams about for the next 50 years to 100 years, yet nope, we just lost all of that. And I find that very dubious. But, whatever. I mean, if you're into something like Fox News, they had an article rather recently in November of last year as to wild conspiracy theory claims that Apollo moon landing was fake and touts new photo and quote-unquote evidence. It's very easy sort of a hit piece, but at the same time, I find it rather interesting that if all this stuff is so crazy, and one of the things that got me to actually look into it was that if all of this is so crazy, why are all these outlets spending so much time debunking it? I understand that they say, oh, people believing things like this just like keep everybody in the Stone Age and keep us and hold all of us back intellectually. However, I find that rather dishonest as far as an actual point for any of that. If you have some ideologically driven jihad that you've got on with all of this, or let's make it a little bit less strong language with that. Let's call it just a life's quest that you've decided to make it to stamp out pseudo-intellectualism. Why would you be using actual news platforms for any of this when I'm sure there's far more interesting and far more relevant things going on in the world than some conspiracy theories that just I'm sure a tiny amount of the population even considers in the first place or would be willing to entertain. Then, of course, we have apologetics here, which are, again, is what people would use to explain of why the Van Allen radiation belts aren't a barrier to spaceflight, and that it's actually the amount of time that they are in contact with them is so limited that it's not even a problem here. And I mean, the article itself that is being referenced out of Forbes is world class as far as the pictures here, that not a single one of these is a real picture. All of them are computer generated graphics, admittedly so. They literally, you can see the credits at the bottom of every single photograph, I guess they're trying to call this, that is just, it's very interesting. It shows because the objects are entering and exiting the atmosphere at such a speed that actually the Van Allen radiation belts aren't actually a problem. However, at the same time, if I'm looking at things from NASA here and having so-called NASA engineers on this, they're saying that the Van Allen radiation belts are actually deadly and are the sort of thing that need to have minimized contact and need to have special shielding put in place on a specifically made craft in order to minimize the amount of radioactive exposure that astronauts would potentially be exposed to. I mean, that itself is kind of an interesting inconsistency, shall we say.
Yeah, it is inconsistency. They do seem to be saying now that they have to protect the astronauts against the Van Allen belts. Also, the other inconsistency is that they talked a lot about the fact that there was no stars in the pictures. The astronauts in their initial press conference said they didn't see any stars, and people have tried to debunk conspiracy theories saying that there's no stars in the photos by saying you just wouldn't see them, they wouldn't be picked up. And yet there's other astronauts saying that they did see stars. There's a lot of inconsistencies between astronauts about whether you see stars when you're on the moon and whether you don't. Did you have anything to say on that?
Absolutely, and as one of the first major inconsistencies people had really pointed out and still continue to point out as far as moon hoax advocates, as far as the landings not actually happening, is the fact that in none of the photographs are you seeing the stars in space. And at the same time, as you mentioned, there's very conflicting narratives as far as whether one actually sees stars in space or not, because certain astronauts have sworn up and down you see just infinite numbers of stars, and it's like a blackness of velvet with diamonds glittering in the night there and everything. Yet simultaneously, other astronauts will say you see nothing because of the very light of the sun and the fact of the nature of how space works. There's light everywhere, so thus you would see none of it. It would just be dark. I mean, that itself seems kind of self-contradictory, but that's just me. And it's actually one of the things that had really made it rather dubious is the fact that without stars in the background, one would not be able to tell where they were on the moon's surface, and one would just have to completely take their word for it. As with stars, you'd literally be able to triangulate what part of the Earth that you're seeing in the pictures that they have, which, again, we'll get to a different point as far as the fact that the Earth is too small in the pictures they have, but that you'd be able to see what side of the Earth is looking opposite of the camera, and thus be able to determine night sky, when it was night, what time of day it should have been, all this stuff, which should have matched up perfectly. There's no reason it shouldn't match up perfectly.
There's one thing I wanted to mention while you're on the subject of the photos as well. People have used Photoshop to take down the brightness on the picture where it shows the Earth in the distance from the moon, and it clearly shows it was pasted in. That kind of stuff. NASA should just admit that they've done that. Otherwise, if they're not going to say we just pasted the Earth in, then they're going to get conspiracy theories, right?
Exactly. And I think that kind of a reaction of the entire secrecy around everything is what makes people so skeptical in the first place. And if NASA was actually an open government institution and everything that people could just look at all of their records, it wouldn't quite be like that, would it? No, I mean, all of us conspiracy theorists would have been shut up a long time ago. I mean, I never would have even paid attention to any of this stuff because literally none of other than the moon rock thing. I mean, the moon rock thing was first and foremost what did it for me. The fact that it's petrified wood and that particular moon rock is supposed to have been broken off from the moon rock chunk. So if that particular moon rock is fake, what is to say that the rest of them aren't fake? And if the rest of them are fake and all of the moon rocks are fake, then what's the point? What's the purpose? What is the rub? What do people get from it? Well, then it kind of casts doubt on everything else. The interviews the astronauts gave afterwards of specifically the Apollo astronauts themselves were actually also contradictory as to whether or not they could see stars and the amount of stars they could see.
Let's also talk about how they behaved during that interview, because I find it very strange. If anyone wants to check it out, just type in, the moon landing press interviews. You should come up with it. And basically, I think you'd agree, Seth. They're acting extremely strangely, like they've just been, like you would imagine they would act if they'd realised that the whole thing was going to be fake, and they've been told to stay on Earth and lie to the press. Basically, they look really shifty, depressed, agitated. They don't look right. They certainly don't look happy. They're not talking about this event like it was an exciting event. What would you have to say on that?
Agreed, 100%. I've actually seen a behavioral psychologist's, or I believe that they call it a behavioral analyst's, analysis of specifically Neil Armstrong's stuff on this, and it's just of his press conference interview, and I believe it was with somebody from BBC. I could be mistaken, but it's actually extremely dubious because the language he uses is you, we type language and doesn't use I language. He doesn't express any kind of joy or excitement necessarily over this, considering this would be, well, supposedly at the time, the single biggest accomplishment in all of human history ever. Yeah. Ever. And that's how they sell it. That is 100% how they sell it in the media, that they're the footprint on the moon. I mean, I even have a little thing up here on my computer of the footprint on the moon will probably last nearly as long as the moon itself. It's a human achievement that will just ring through the ages forever and all this type of stuff. And that itself is kind of dubious. I mean, the amount of self-gratification and self-aggrandizement really seems ridiculous.
People want to check out what you just mentioned there, the testimony analysis. There's a guy who does testimony analysis for criminal services, basically, and he analyzes people's speech and then can tell you whether they're lying and what they're really trying to tell you. And this can be found if you go onto YouTube and type Richard D Hall and then just type the astronauts. You'll come up with the expert's analysis of Armstrong talking about the moon landings, and yeah, he's actually used by the police and government agents to in criminal cases. So what he's got to say is quite interesting about Armstrong.
Well, especially as coming from a background of somebody himself who is a moon landing believer and all this type of stuff. I think that was itself very telling. But at the same time, anybody that looks at any of this stuff with fresh eyes that aren't looking through rose-colored glasses at all of this will understand, yeah, of course it's very dubious. I mean, look at the footage supposedly itself of the moon landings. It's supposed to be like a video of a curtain with a video playing on it, or of a projection screen with a video playing on it. That itself is highly dubious. I'm supposed to believe, because this is what they tell me, that 238,000 miles away, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins are talking to Richard Nixon live on a phone from 238,000 miles away, and that itself is rather dubious, considering phone calls and phone service can't travel just for shit in modern day America even now, with supposedly satellites everywhere and all this stuff that's supposed to be aiding us in our modern communication. One can still drop calls because of hillsides and things, and yet these guys are supposed to be communicating through deadly radiation that would completely scramble all of what they're talking about, and on two bodies that are moving in two different directions, because the moon is literally orbiting the Earth while the Earth simultaneously rotates. So, and is moving in its own direction. It's just, yeah.
And conveniently just appears to be standing
stationary in their pictures.
Yeah, I find that, pretty weird as well. But, so I also wanted to mention, for anyone listening who really wants to look into this properly, you have to watch A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, director Bart Sibrel. Basically, they show what seems to be the astronauts faking a picture of the Earth. There's different explanations to what they're actually doing. Some people say they're using the window to make a circle of the Earth so it looks like the Earth, and some people say they're using a transparency on the window to make it look like the Earth. But either way, it's date stamped for a time when they're actually supposed to be on the moon. So it's highly suspicious and quite good evidence, and it says not for public viewing on the video, and Armstrong actually viewed it and didn't deny that it was real. So anything to say on that, Seth?
Not a whole ton. I mean, other than that, people I definitely would encourage to look at that film, because regardless of the eccentricity of the director himself and everything, as the guy interviewing all these astronauts, their reactions are very, very telling, especially Buzz Aldrin punching him in the face, but also some of these guys not willing, or even almost none of them are willing to swear on the Bible, but then the few that are, because swearing on a Bible can be used as an affidavit against you in a court of law, they actually are willing to swear on the Bible, but not under penalty or under an oath of treason or damnation or whatever sort of goofy term he kind of comes up with there or whatever. But one of the guy's reactions there is so telling, where it's under penalty of treason as lying to your fellow countrymen, and he's like, "What? Lying to your fellow countrymen? That's not treason."
Like, if I said to you, Seth, you don't live in America, I don't think you'd be angry. You'd just think I was an idiot, wouldn't you? Really?
Yeah, I would be like, "Oh, okay, you think I'm pretending that I live in America, but in reality, I'm actually in Russia right now, and secretly a Russian agent working for the international Donald Trump conspiracy," or some madness like that.
But if you had been lying that you were living in America, and it was quite a serious matter, then you might get angry. So it is kind of telling that he punches Bart Sibrel, I think, because if he was lying, you wouldn't really care. It wouldn't really matter, I don't think.
Michael Collins, literally pushing his face into the camera there and everything, like acting. The best equivalency I could think of is like a teenage boy that is throwing a temper tantrum and is just absolutely pissed off about something, like some girl said that, and he just throws a fit, jams his face into the camera, leaves a giant nose print on the camera, and kind of storms off, gets into his car, and burns out, drives away. I'm like, wow, that's grown men running away from a man for a simple question. Literally, you can watch them run on this video. It is ridiculous. 60 and 70-year-old men running away from a dude over a question. Kind of interesting.
I wanted to bring up some of the suspicious deaths surrounding the original moon landings and the train.
Well, there's one bigger one than anything, definitely, as far as Gus Grissom.
Yeah, and the point I wanted to make about that situation was, again, we're always led to believe that NASA is an incredible organization with a huge attention to detail, and yet they burned alive some of their astronauts in a room, and they were only feet away from the people organizing the training drill, and they just couldn't open a door, so they all burned to death. And I find that highly suspicious, because surely they would have planned for the possibility that inside this capsule they were in, that a fire could start, and there's no reason for them to burn to death. You'd have you want to simulate the idea that they're on the moon, but you don't have to get to the point where that you can't have a spare door in the capsule. It's a training module, Anything to say on that?
Well, I mean, he was a guy that was very vocal about his criticisms to the Apollo program, and was supposed to be part of originally the Apollo 1 missions. Technically he was until his death, but he didn't get to see the quote-unquote end of it, or the great accomplishment of landing on the moon and all this stuff. And that itself should also be extremely interesting to anybody that's looking into these looking into these Apollo programs, is the fact that this guy is the most vocal critic of it. Just any interview that he's in, just kind of has this very kind of smart ass sarcasm to everything of, yep, we're going to space. Yep, it's going to work, going to get there. And I think it's just of somebody that's like, well, an Air Force veteran or something that's just very disappointed in seeing the actual reality of what all these people are doing versus what the theory and what the idea was behind it originally. Because I'm sure all of these guys fully believed in this at one point, if not the entire time for the most part.
Well, if the moon landings were faked, a lot of people wouldn't need it to have been told about that. So, and he might have been one of them, and he might have just been picking up on the idea that they're not taking it seriously. Because if they were faking it, then he was probably picking up on the fact that they don't seem to be really taking this seriously. He even said, if we can't communicate from one room to another, how can we communicate, thousands of miles? So, yeah, maybe they thought, we're going to have to get rid of these guys, but they're not going to be able to lie for us.
But Scott, that's crazy. That you're saying a U.S. government agency would frag one of its own, or three of its own in this case? Oh, I don't know, man. That sounds kind of like tinfoil hattery, Scott. Everybody knows the U.S. government never did anything wrong, especially when the moon landings and everything around them took place under both the Kennedy and everyone's favorite LBJ and everyone's favorite, as far as the actual moon landings themselves, the Nixon administration.
Gus's family also believe he was murdered, and I think you should always look to the families. They're probably going to have a good grip on the situation. They believe he was murdered. I don't know why they believe he was murdered, whether they believe in the moon landing conspiracies or not, but they certainly believe he was murdered.
Well, it's because of how suspicious it is. It's just that itself is highly suspicious. He's the one guy more than anybody that is very vocal and has been in the media and said that he is vocally a critic of all of this. And that itself is highly dubious, especially when everything is supposed to be based on faith and based on getting people, if this is indeed fake, getting people hyped for it and getting people excited and all this type of stuff, because it's a PR stunt, essentially, if it's not real. And it's a program of brainwashing. I mean, people might act like this is crazy, but here's a little appeal to celebrity authority. I mean, the moon landings are compelling enough in their hoaxiness that Joe Rogan himself used to actually question the moon landings before becoming modern TV/radio show Joe Rogan and podcast Joe Rogan, that now believes the moon landings definitely happened. But this guy literally used to be one of the most vocal Hollywood critics of the moon landings you could find, and just completely stopped. I mean, most people out there, if they were to look this up on YouTube or Google or something to try and find results for it, are probably going to find one of his lectures on the topic. And honestly, depending on what year this discussion takes place, he could have a 100% flip-flopped view of it and be feeding you completely different talking points. So who knows as far as that, but at least as far as the TV heads that love to just be like, oh, I identify that guy, so thus now I can give this idea merit or whatever. Those people can now at least have their little bit of bread and circus. But going on a kind of a list here of some of the big things that stood out for me as far as the moon landings being a hoax, especially Apollo 11 more than any of them, we're coming with the flag waving in the footage there or whatever. There is no source of wind, should be none on the moon. People would say, no, it's waving because of the motion of the guy putting it in the ground. And then also the movement there. I've also heard apologists say, solar winds. Yeah, solar winds, because that's what solar winds are, and that's how not having an atmosphere works.
I've heard some people say that in a vacuum as well, you wouldn't be able to have jets working, thrusters and things like that. I'm no expert on that, so that's the problem with when it comes to the moon. We don't necessarily know the science behind these things, so again,
well, and we're just taking their word for it, Scott. And so I mean, that's the thing that makes it so sketchy, is the fact that I'm not saying that space is, or whatever, that the thermosphere is this temperature, or that the moon is actually rotating around the Earth at this speed, and that it's actually this distance. And all. This is all them and all what they say. And the fact that it can't even come together in a way that makes sense from what they are saying should make people at least slightly skeptical, to the point that they should at very least entertain the thought to look into it. I mean, my God, the fact that people can't necessarily in this modern day and age, the idea that people can't hold more than one idea in their head on an issue without necessarily accepting either or any as ultimate truth, the fact that that's considered impossible is ridiculous. I mean, I don't understand what the hell has happened to people. But continuing on, though, we have the no crater underneath the lunar module, the fact that the lunar module didn't actually have thruster burn as it was leaving the moon, but also that in its landing it had no burn mark and left no imprint from the module, which itself should be very telling. I mean, it's supposed to be a 17-ton module. Whether or not the sides of it for the walls look like gold foil or something like that, like you'd cook a turkey in, is completely irrelevant. The footprints on the moon thing, as we mentioned there, the fact that the moon is supposed to have no atmosphere and that it's only supposed to be 1/6 gravity. I believe that there's 5/6 less gravity than on Earth is the official numbers on that.
I wanted to talk briefly about that as well. 1/6 the gravity, and yet they're, we've all seen the videos of them moving really slowly. Actually, you'd expect them to move a bit faster, wouldn't you, in 1/6 gravity?
And also be moving a lot higher, considering this is something that even a very famous conspiracy theorist who was, a lot of people would say, assassinated there or who died by rather violent means, William Cooper, actually even covered on his show as well back in the day. This is before Flat Earth, before all that type of stuff, when people would put an interest in it. But it's actually just as far as a perspective of somebody interested in the moon landings, that the astronauts that were all said the entire time beforehand and afterwards that somehow the moon has 1/6 gravity, the astronauts would be able to do fabulous, wondrous, even acrobatic maneuvers and would be able to do flips and jumps because one would be able to jump at like 5 times or 6 times the average height of what you'd be able to. And that itself is not at all reflected in what we saw. And people can try and come up with all sorts of apologist excuses, but the fact is, the gear that they had, while it would be rather cumbersome on Earth in 1/6 gravity, not only would their gear have weighed but 1/6 or a fraction of what it would have weighed on Earth, they themselves would have weighed 1 fraction of that and would still have the appropriate muscle mass and strength of a being that weighed far more than that. So, I mean, it has to give somewhere. Something has to give. They can't have their cake and eat it too with this. And that also kind of covers with the footprints and whatnot of the distance between them, which is absolutely pitiful and is what you would expect of people kind of bouncing around doing like hopscotch and then having the film slowed down. That's exactly what you would expect from that and is ridiculous. The lack of real dust on the lunar module or the astronauts themselves, considering the entire surface of the moon is, according to them, covered in a fine rock dust. Yet you don't see that reflected everywhere. I mean, you see it when the lunar rover is driving around and it's spitting up like what looks to be sand or something. But you don't see that with anything else. And I find that to be rather telling.
So you would say that lunar rover wouldn't actually have been able to fit with the astronauts and all the equipment actually on the lunar rover.
Of course.
Have actually been able to fit properly in the module itself.
Well, that would make perfect sense there, Scott, considering the module itself doesn't look capable of having 3 human beings survive being trying to, I guess, even let's pretend this thing has thrusters in real life and actually could go anywhere. I could not see that being able to travel on Earth without killing all 3 occupants in less than a few minutes, but much less going to less going to space. Actually,
the lander was tested on Earth, and everyone can see the video of it being tested, and it nearly killed Armstrong, right? Because if you go onto YouTube, you should be able to see the trial of it, where he
it's
tries
absolutely
to land
goofy.
it and he has to parachute out. And I was talking to a friend today, and I don't recall actually seeing it successfully being flown on Earth. And you would think if they've got a video of it crashing, they would have at least some out there of it flying really well. Because if they can't fly that well on Earth, there's no way they're going to be able to fly it well on.
It's the 1/6 gravity.
So,
yeah, it's the 1/6 gravity, Scott. That just makes it way easier without you having any experience of doing that. It's just, it's space, man. It's science, Scott. What are you, anti-science? I mean, come on.
No, and it was flown manually by Armstrong.
Well, yeah, because how would you have a computer that's supposed to calculate any of this and doing it in an environment you've never been in? It's like,
well, I was watching a video today which said it was being landed by computer, but then it was taken over manually because he saw it was going into a crater or something. And you would have thought again, I thought all these calculations are precise. How are you gonna? Why would it have calculated to land in the middle of a crater that you didn't want to land in? So it had to be taken over manually. And I would have thought manually flying something you've never flown before in 1/6 gravity, and the last time you did, you crashed it on Earth. You wouldn't be that confident, would you?
The fact that you have people moving that are supposed to be landing on a moving object that's moving at thousands of miles an hour through space. That itself alone, it's too rich, man. It's too rich. You have somebody that has never flown in this environment before, that is supposed to be flying in a completely new environment in 1/6 gravity on a celestial body that is moving at 2,000 miles an hour.
And when it was flown on Earth, that you crashed, and the first time you ever tried to land on the moon, you did it successfully. You would expect to crash the first time you landed on the moon, basically.
In fact, it was actually the absolute insanity of ever sending human beings to that. The fact that wasn't just an unmanned mission in the history books and everything like that, it just should be illustration enough. Much less, here we're going to keep going, but there's just from an interesting perspective too, the fact that all three of the guys that landed on the moon there with Apollo 11, as well as all the other moon missions, are all Freemasons. Literally every single last one. This is public record, public knowledge. I find that interesting that the very male, as David Icke fans might know, the very male phallus-oriented cult that is Freemasonry would send three men onto a celestial body that in pagan culture and in the rest of human society is identified with like the divine feminine and everything like that. Just very interesting. And it would be Apollo 11 and 12, but not 13 that would make it to the moon. So interesting.
On that subject, I think Freeman Fly, he's another podcaster, did an episode where he showed there was a photo that the Freemasons have in one of their museums, which shows the Freemason flag planted on the moon, which they put there before and then took away apparently. And as you say, they were all Freemasons who are able to keep a secret, if they were told.
Well, and that they're all white men. Isn't that interesting that the only people that have gone to the moon are all white male Freemasons? You'd figure in America's modern day and the rest of the Western civilization's modern day politically correct culture, we'd be absolutely gnashing our teeth at that, man, that would be just such a big deal that we need to rectify that situation. But interestingly enough, complete silence on that.
We need to put the first woman on the moon for a start, don't we?
Yeah, we need the first woman, the first black man, the first Latino, the first Asian man on the moon. We need all that. Technically you have China there, but of course China also said that they didn't see U.S. Proof of the moon landings there or whatever. So but of course people here would say, oh, that's just China trolling everybody and stuff. But hey, interesting.
What would be your other key points about the idea that we haven't landed on the moon?
Okay, well, let's see. We have the film that itself would have to survive space radiation, which, I have links and more than enough stuff there that people could look up just on their own of Googling radiation damages film, and you'll see absolute horror stories there that they have of people's film being damaged by just X-rays at airport security and stuff like that. Just X-rays, absolutely decimating their film. And so I find that rather interesting that this film was specially protected from that radiation, which was so dangerous. Continuing on, though, we have lighting casting shadows from multiple angles. This is a really famous one and very popular in a lot of moon hoax stuff. As far as the film of the moon landings, there appear to be light sources coming from multiple angles. The apologists would explain this as, well, the sun is just so big and so vast that in space, of course, it would cause shadows from multiple angles. I think that actually is a ridiculous non-answer, because that actually doesn't answer anything and is not a rebuttal at all.
Although I have heard some people say that if you've got some hills or different levels of terrain, that it can cause shadows to appear to go in different directions just because of the terrain, and I would accept that as a possibility. So
Well, you know one thing shadows don't do, Scott? They don't cause your horizon line to recede at an angle which would make the moon, from their video, even smaller than what it's supposed to be. There's the fact that the Earth itself is about like 1/3 or less the size of what it should be, because for some reason they have an Earth that is the size of the moon. The size the moon is from the Earth of what we see. That's what they have the size of the Earth as, when the Earth is supposed to be 4 times the size of the moon.
Right,
so
that would be huge. NASA would have to explain that. And they were using Hasselblad cameras, weren't they?
Yes.
Body-mounted ones. And some people say, well, how did they take all of these great pictures, without really being able to look through the viewfinders as well?
Exactly. And in addition, finally, some of the last ones we have here, the astronauts walking that appears to be slowed down footage, pretty obviously to anybody that'll actually just watch it. I mean, really look at it, man. It's pretty bad. Also, the fact that they're supposed to be maintaining radio contact with people 238,000 miles away. And then also, the complete vacuum of space. The fact that no matter how deftly woven these layers of cloth are, and how water-cooled their suits are, we're talking about suits that are supposed to be going into an environment that it is literally physically impossible to replicate on Earth in any way. You can try, but you cannot create a full, complete 100% vacuum that somebody in any suit that exists can stand in. The Mythbusters did a freaking vacuum with, I believe, a compressor pump that they had to create a vacuum, which can create a vacuum that is like 1 iota the strength of a complete vacuum or an absolute vacuum. And the guy's hand and arm could barely move an inch. It was ridiculous to watch, and yet they used that as their rebuttal for the moon landing people for saying, oh, you wouldn't be able to move in a vacuum. Well, not only that, but your physical form, mass, all of that, the lunar lander, your cute little moon suit and all that stuff would have to fill the entire void of space, because the very nature of a vacuum is it tries to get what's in the vacuum that is not a vacuum to be in the entirety of the vacuum. That's why literally...
That's a good point about the communication over 238,000, nearly 239,000 miles.
How would sound travel in a vacuum?
Yeah, and how did we have radio technology that covered that distance? That's never been done before since, it's pretty weird,
Well, don't worry, Scott. In wrapping up, apparently, with the Voyager and all that type of stuff, they've got satellites out there that are, I believe, what did they say, billions of miles even from the Earth, that can still radio back photos. That just beautiful data for them to make photos with and stuff. And just, Well, I mean, obviously, everything that we're talking about here is obvious, just conspiracy theory there, Scott, and nobody should look up any of this. I'm sure it wouldn't be interesting, sure it wouldn't be enlightening. I mean, after all, Scott, they sent a car to space. I mean, Elon Musk filmed it. You know that was real. They're also now the new NASA missions. I swear to God, one of them that they had on Live Science the other day, I'm not joking, I'm sure you may have seen this, maybe not. The ISS now has a bunch of, I shit you not, sperm on it, that these guys are doing sperm experiments in space. That's literal. They are putting this out to people. And then also that the new NASA mission now is also to send a probe to the sun, try and touch the sun. Yeah.
But some other things to mention are like, duplicate scenery seen in some photos on the original mission. Hills in the background with the lunar.
Yeah, well, training footage that they had of the literal fake moon that they had set up of the mock stuff and how they would move around it and film it and all this type of stuff that is later said to, oh, no, that was for the practices of the approach and stuff that these guys had the little what looked to be like a camera, a mounted camera a roller that you'd be able to push it around on and everything. No, that actually was for them to get their bearings for how they would come at the moon and all that type of stuff. That's what that was for and everything. Like, oh, interesting. Yep, all the stuff for faking it is actually just it's there for training. It's like the modern day swimming pools and stuff there in Russia, Scott. It's all about training for space by not actually replicating space, because somehow being in a zone with more pressure, i.e. underwater, replicates an environment with zero pressure, i.e. space. But of course, that's just a conspiracy theory for another time.
Well, and an argument against the moon landings being faked, which I keep hearing on other videos, are basically thousands of people were involved in the moon landing projects. There's no way you're not gonna get a whistleblower over the years. You know, they're not all gonna keep with the theory over the years. So, which I think is just a really silly argument against, actually, because you wouldn't not everyone would have to know. You wouldn't actually need to let people who were just observing one computer. You wouldn't have to let them know in on the fakeness. And,
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it's compartmentalization. It's something that's well known within every single branch of government to exist. And it's like absolutely asinine that people act as though compartmentalization wouldn't be used in that. How many people are supposed to have worked on the atomic bombs? I mean, do you think every last one of those people knew that it's going to be an atomic bomb that we're going to drop 2 of on a civilian population 2 different times in 2 different places on a nation that's already declared that it's given up, that it's surrendered to the United States? And don't worry, they won't accept your surrender until afterwards. But again, I'm sure all those people, if that would have happened, Seth, and those people would have knowingly been in that, there would have been a whistleblower or something. I'm waiting.
Yeah, and one other argument, though, which is quite a good one, I'd say, not totally conclusive, but quite a good one, is they left a laser reflector on the moon, and now there are some scientists who are regularly firing lasers at that mirror left on the moon and getting data back from it. Some arguments against that, debunking that, have said, well, no, you can do that just against the moon's surface anyway. So
yes, quite literally, just people without a special fancy laser or anything like that, just with a freaking laser pointer, because it's a whole nother discussion for another time. It's one of those things that just we could go into this for hours and hours, but I know you've got a bit to get to, and I honestly just if you keep letting me talk, I'll go on for days and days with this stuff.
Yeah, well, we may talk about it again, because it's something that
I would love
to talk about for a long time. We can finish again by saying, though, again, I would say I'm not 100% sure we didn't land on the moon, but I'm increasingly starting to think we didn't. And if we didn't, then it makes the government's job a whole lot easier. They can easily just say, okay, there was a chemical attack in Syria last week, and we need to go to war with Syria and also start attacking Russia. And people are just going to believe it, because governments don't lie that big, do they?
Well, exactly. I'm sure people will, believe whatever narrative they have. Osama bin Laden lived longer than any human being on dialysis to ever exist, and was obviously the architect of 9/11 and stuff. It's just people will believe anything, man. People will believe anything.
It could have been an experiment to see how much people will believe, and once they got that one out of the way, they thought, right, we can start with the rest of them then.
Oh, absolutely. But that also comes to just in general, do governments lie? Do religious figures lie? Do authority figures in general lie in order to preserve their authority and power? And that'd be an entire another show, I'm sure. But I'm sure most of your audience knows the answer to those questions, and doesn't need me to think for them. So everybody think for yourself. Don't just believe blindly anything I've said here. Actually look all of this up. You can confirm it. Or if you choose to want to refute it, it'd probably behoove you to look it up in the first place, so you could actively, truly repute any of this type of stuff or refute it, rather than just kind of hurling ad hominem attacks, because that doesn't really do anything for the debate either way. It's one thing I've made up my mind to not do at all. People that believe in the moon landings, I'm not going to insult you. I'm not going to say you're dumb. I'm not any of that, because I believed it too. I believe all of this stuff. So unless I thought I was a moron at one point, which I know I wasn't, why am I going to call everybody else a moron that just simply has a different perspective than me, especially when I believe that those people as well as myself are deceived. So it's something that we have to come together and talk about, and they don't want an even, well-thought, well-reasoned debate on the subject. So, I mean, anytime somebody feels the need to and wants to talk about stuff like that, always up for it. I'm down for any kind of news we can go into. I'm sure everybody listening is more than aware of the state of the world right now and the absolute madness going on everywhere, and we could talk about any of it for hours and hours. But for this episode of Truth Sentinel, thank you for listening, everybody. And it was a pleasure being here, Scott. Anytime you want to talk about anything like this, just feel free to hit me up.
Yeah, thanks, Seth. It's been great talking to you again. And we'll definitely chat again about something else again soon. And yeah, for anyone listening, I think at the very least we could agree that it's not crazy to think we didn't land on the moon, and it's quite if we did, then That was quite some crazy achievement we did back then, if we did. So check out some of the things we've talked about and let us know what you think. And thanks again, Seth, for joining us.
Very welcome.